just going to dive right in because I'm not sure who is there and who's not. So tonight, I'm going to do some stuff a little different than last time. And hopefully things are going to behave a little bit more than they did last week. I've got a couple different things going here. So tonight we're going to talk about keyboards, synthesizers. Shocker, I know. Considering the room I'm in, there's, at last check, I think there's 14 or 15 keyboards in here. So what I'm going to do, I've got a couple preset questions. Let me first say hi, see who else here. I thought this was going to work on my iPad, but it's not showing up there. Mark DeSantis. Hey, Mark. Tom Sanderson, what's going on? Sonny, what's happening? Cindy, Steve Barnes, Tom Sanderson. Okay, cool. Enough of you are here. We can jump in. So, what I'm going to do, I've got a list of questions that people have already submitted. I'm going to kind of go down this list while some more people show up, and I'll just start talking about some of these things. And then I'll jump back over and see what some of your questions are. So I've been picking these off of Instagram and Facebook, and in no particular order. When it comes to sound design and synthesis, do you more often find yourself starting with a preset or reference and modifying that sound, or starting from a fundamental initialized patch? Personally, I always know what I'm looking for. Generally, if I'm in the middle of producing something, well, I shouldn't say I always know what I'm looking for. Sometimes you don't. But generally, I have an idea. If I'm looking for a pad sound, for example, I know which keyboards excel at that kind of thing. I know what their character is, and so I'll tend to jump to a particular keyboard if I'm looking for a sound in that particular ballpark. And then I'll start thumbing through some sounds. And when I find something that's kind of in the ballpark of what I'm looking for, then I usually take that and run with it and start modifying that a little bit and so on. I don't think I ever start from scratch. It just takes too long. Time is too short and valuable to do that. I tend to start with something that that kind of puts me in the right frame of mind and go from there. My buddy Christian Jack asked, can consumers really hear the difference between high-quality analog gear and basic digital gear when both are processed correctly? This kind of gets into something that I've wanted to talk about for a while. The whole analog versus digital debate when it comes to synthesizers, especially vintage synthesizers. And we talked about this a little bit on the last week in the very first thing when nothing was working right. And again, I'll touch on this same story I told last week. When I was at the NAMM show back in January, I went to the Roland booth because I knew that they had, just released their new Jupiter X, which I'm going to show you in a few minutes. And it is a recreation, essentially, of their classic Jupiter 8, which was an iconic synthesizer from the 80s. It's Jump, I believe, Van Halen. I mean, all these iconic songs. It's one of the biggest synths of the 80s. A lot of people have begged Roland, will you please do a legitimate analog recreation of that, not a digital one? And I get why people say that, but man, to me, the question isn't, man, is it analog or is it digital? It's, does it sound good and does it inspire me? Those are the criteria. Because frankly, I mean, I'm surrounded by keyboards in here. I've got a handful of real analog synthesizers and digital ones. And curiously, let me jump over to Logic here for a second. And I will show you something here. Here we go. So in Logic, I've got a handful of my favorite synthesizers pre-mapped in here. So right now, let me go to the Access Virus, which is one of my favorite keyboards of all time. This thing, it's kind of known, that's kind of a trance EDM sound. Let me go to my patch list here and pull up a couple flavors. What I'm trying to get at here is that this synth is digital. but it's a digital modeling of an analog engine. And it just makes these incredible so that's kind of a processed stuff like that. Does all kinds of so that's an example of a digital synth that just sounds great. And I don't care whether it's analog or digital. What I care about is it sounds stunning. So while I'm here, let's go to, let me jump over to the Roland stuff. Give me a second. I'm going to go over there. All right, hopefully you can still see me and hear me. So this is the new Jupiter X that just came out in this month. It's brand new. And I've got it called up on one of its new modeling engines that models the old SH-101. Now, it certainly has Juno and Jupiter models and JX8P, which are incredible. But I want to give you, I'll just thumb through a couple sounds here. Because these are all, actually, hang on, something's wrong here. There we go. I was accidentally triggering the virus. So now you're just hearing the Jupiter X. And this thing is a digital synth that's modeling its old analog counterparts. Now, let me just go through some sounds here. Try and find an analog bass. There we go. There's a good example. So this is a typical... All right, close enough. Let me just adjust it here. I'll show you a couple things. Now, pay attention. One thing you'll notice right away is the filter. A lot of people would say, "Oh, it's digital. The filter's not going to be real smooth. It's gonna have stair steps to it." And it doesn't. This thing, the resolution is, I forget how it translates, but it's like 1,000 steps versus the old 127 of classic MIDI. Now, also, there's some things in here that you can actually determine whether this thing acts like an old analog synthesizer. It's called the age parameter. You can go in here and determine how old you want it to be. So you could dial in and say I want it to sound 40 years old. And what that does is it's modeling what happens to capacitors and all the components that make analog synths that are decades old have the character that they do. Another cool thing about this synth is it's got 3 different filter models. R for Roland, but what's really cool is they give you, of course they can't spell it out, but M for Moog, and S for sequential. Now, through Facebook, you're not going to hear a whole lot of difference until you get down in the lower range. Here's Roland. Here's Moog. And here's sequential. Anyway, so I'll just go through a couple more sounds here. See, so it has that character that an analog synth, kind of the pitch instability, and you can dial in as much or as little of that as you want. And okay, so enough of that. Let me go back to scene mode here, and I'll just dial in a couple of these more factory preset kind of things here. See, so now there's an example of more of a digital sound, and it just excels at this big sounding. Yeah, that's not for me. Anyway, so that's the idea. Jumping up to this guy, the System 8, this is another one of my favorites. Happens to also be from Roland from the last few years. This one, if I really wanted a truly unmistakable Jupiter 8 or Juno 106 or JX3P or System 100, this is the thing I would go to. Anyway, I'm not going to spend all night on that, so I'm going to go back over here. Okay, and let's go back to main camera. So let me get back to some questions, and then I want to see what you guys are saying, so I kind of see if I can multitask here. A couple more questions. How do you decide what synth sounds you use when constructing an arrangement? Use a Michael W. Smith tune as an example. This kind of goes back to what I was saying before. I generally have an idea what I'm looking for. If I'm in the studio and I've got access to all my keyboards, it's just a matter of saying, okay, if I want something that's really analog and kind of gritty, I would typically go for, let's see, here's the Arturia Matrix Brute. Switch back over to Logic so you can see. It happens to have another sequence. Here's the Prophet Rev 2. So there's a couple examples, analog stuff, also the Korg Mini-Log. Another one that's just, it sounds massive. It's only got 4 notes of polyphony, but man, for a small little keyboard, it sounds ridiculous. So there's a couple analog flavors. Let me take you back 30 years to the Roland D50. This one is an old favorite because this is in the whole other direction. This is straight up digital, but it has these unmistakable pads and soundscape type things that I always gravitate to. Now, I've got a plug-in on there called B2, which is one of my favorite reverbs. Let me take that off so you can hear just the D50 by itself. But it's great for atmospheres, and then you put a modern reverb on it like that. Okay, so there you go. It's just an idea, you know, you tend to know what you're looking for, so you can either, if you've got the hardware, you jump to something that you know has the sounds you're looking for, or you jump to a plug-in that does what you want. The house is burning down. You can only take one keyboard, not a controller. If I had $1 for every time somebody asked me this, what's your favorite? It's impossible to, that's like saying, what's your favorite child? They're all so different, and they all are very, very unique. I tend to have current favorites. Probably one of the most enamored, the one that has me the most enamored right now is the Korg Wave State. It's brand new from Korg, and those of you who are keyboard players remember the Korg Wave Station from the early 90s. It's like a wave station on steroids. So let me jump over that guy. See if you can see. There you go. There's the wave state. Just going to thumb through a couple sounds, and you can get an idea what that sounds like. Whoops, hang on. Okay, here we go. So a lot of stuff like the Wave Station used to do. I'm not really familiar with it yet, so I can't remember where all the cool sounds are. But it just has the same character as the Wave Station, but man, it just sounds so good. Love that. That's like a James Newton Howard score. So it's kind of a mixed bag. There's some stuff that borders on cheesy, but there's also stuff that is just so, again, that soundtrack kind of thing, very, very soundscapey and beautiful. Okay, try and get through these quickly. I don't want to keep you guys too long. A lot of people ask this. I want a digital piano / master controller with excellent piano sound, real piano key feel, and controller capability. Okay, so there's a couple aspects to that. If you want a master keyboard that has, that's got piano sounds in it, to me, the top contenders are always going to be Yamaha, Roland. A lot of guys like Nord. Nord is always bottom of the list for me. It's just a personal preference thing. They're great, but it's just not. I don't like the way they're laid out, and I also don't like keyboards that with Fatar key beds, and Nord uses Fatar. They just don't play like a Yamaha or a Roland. Specific models. For 10 years, I've played Yamaha CP300 digital piano on the road with Smitty, and that's probably my all-time favorite as a digital piano. It just has the best action I can imagine. Plays like a real instrument. Other keyboards have that same key bed from Yamaha, the Montage 8, the previous models, P250, and so on. So those are great. Roland, in the Roland category, the RD2000 is their current flagship. That is a phenomenal. That one's more of a spaceship. That's if you want to control a real elaborate MIDI system, that would be the one. It's got 8 zones on it that you can assign splits and layers and all, and it's faders to control everything. And it's got a wooden action, which feels really, really good. If you don't need sounds built in, I just happened to get, you can't see it here, I don't have any cameras on it, but I still love the CP300, but because I had surgery on both hands last year, I need a break from really heavily weighted keyboard actions. So I moved the CP300 I'll still use on the road, but in the studio, I replaced it with a Korg D1, which is, I think it's about a year old. It's just a bare bones digital piano. It's not very deep. It's only barely bigger than the keyboard itself. It's got a handful of sounds in it. It doesn't even have USB. It just has regular MIDI jacks and a sustain pedal jack. That's it. But it's really inexpensive, and it has a high-end Japanese-made key bed, and so it feels great. It's just not quite as heavy as the Yamaha that I'm used to, but it works for me because I'm getting old. So those are a few for master keyboard controllers. How do you know when you found the right sound, the right pad, piano, whatever you're looking for, with thousands of patches available? I can spend literally hours auditioning sounds for one song. How do I know when I've found the right sound? An engineer friend of mine years ago said, if it sounds good, it is good. I think that was the quote. You just tend to know. There's definitely such a thing as option anxiety, options overload. I can get sucked into that. I find myself just. Michael actually talks about back in the day when he was doing his pop stuff. Brian Lennox, the guy that produced the Go West Young Man and Change Your World records, Brian would spend hours auditioning kick drum sounds and snare sounds. And Smitty has zero attention span, so he would be out of there. So somewhere there's a happy medium. You just have to figure out, at what point is this really going to make a difference to the end user? So to me, I just tend to know. I'm extremely picky, so I will spend a certain amount of time crafting a sound and getting it just the way I want it. But at some point, you also have to realize, okay, what I'm doing here, nobody's going to even be able to hear it. So you just kind of have to weigh that. Okay, I think that's basically it for the questions. One guy asked a couple really detailed things about specific keyboards, like does the Roland Jupiter X, does it really sound as good as the original? And we kind of touched on that already. To me, it is a totally viable stand-in for a Jupiter 8, because how many of us has $15,000 sitting around that we can go on eBay and grab a Jupiter 8? Personally, even if I had that kind of money, there's no way I would spend it on something like that. You could fill a room with 5 or 6 keyboards for that kind of money that give you a world of possibilities. So again, to me, the question is not, does it sound, or is it analog or digital, or can it really sound exactly like the original? No two original Jupiter 8s sound exactly the same, because they're 40 years old, 35 years old. They've aged differently depending on where they have lived and all that kind of stuff. So, again, the question is, does it inspire you, and does it sound good? So now let me jump over here and see if anybody's asking questions here. Let's see. Jonathan Willis, hey buddy, hope you're doing well. And you don't have to tune the digital synths. Yes, that's a great point. It's funny. I did find 1 or 2 keyboards on eBay. In fact, a good chunk of the room here, looks can be deceiving. I did a studio tour on YouTube and a couple weeks ago, and a couple of people said, "Man, you must have spent a fortune." And really, it's not necessarily what it looks like. My DX7, which was $2,000 in 1983, I got it for $100 on eBay. When they were going for $1,000, they're still actually, they kind of fluctuate, but because it's a vintage icon, if you find one in great shape, they can go for quite a bit. I happened to find one in Japan that was absolute mint. So you got to watch eBay, and you can find great deals. So anything I have in here that's not a new model, it's all stuff I found on eBay. So anyway, let's go back to questions here. Kevin Taylor, what's happening? Okay, sorry, I'm having to squint. My screen is far away. Jupiter sounds good. Probably have to get one. Yes, Matt Ulrich. Yeah, you do need to get one. It is. There's a few families of flavors. I mean, in terms of the analog versus digital world, there's the Roland sound, which encompasses the Jupiter 8, the Juno 106, the JX8P, JX10, and the SH101. Those are kind of the staples. Think of the soundtrack to Stranger Things. That is very much the Roland sound. A lot of that was done on a Juno 106. Again, a few other things. Then there's the sequential Dave Smith stuff, like the Prophet 5, the original. Smitty still has his from 1978, 79, I believe. I need to find a picture of him and post it for you. But the current stuff, the Prophet, I've got a Prophet Rev 2 over here. That is that flavor. The Access Virus is kind of straddles both worlds. It can do some of the most gorgeous soundscapes, but it also does wicked sounding analog emulations that when people hear them, last thing they're going to be thinking is that analog or digital. They're just going to think, oh my gosh, it sounds great. While I'm thinking of that, let me go back to, let you hear a couple more sounds from the Virus, just because it's such a cool synth. In no particular order. If you've got a full range system with subwoofers, it just sounds so good. From Top Gun. I'll get points from my wife for that sound. So there you go. Just a little taste. Very, very cool stuff. So let's see. What else? Let me go back to your questions. Michael Debbage, being a rocker. I hope I'm saying your last name right, my friend. Being a rocker, I'm loving the big, fat synthesizer Moog sound. Yeah, buddy, me too. Oh, yeah, hello. Speaking of analog monsters, the Moog family is unmistakable. And that, man, some people would be mad at me for saying this, but the Behringer Model D, I've got one sitting here on my desk. You can't see it. It is unbelievably good sounding. I've put it up against real Moog synthesizers that are current, other than the Moog 1, which is $8,000. And I'm telling you, the Behringer is as good or better in a lot of cases. Yeah, what else? Let's see. Dave Avila, I hope I'm saying your name right. What are the strengths of the Jupiter over the System 8? Great question. The System 8, I think I talked about this a little earlier. The System 8, that one excels if you're looking for a straight-up Juno 106, Jupiter 8, System 100, some of those pieces. It's got the plug-out feature, so you can load different engines, modeling engines into it, up to 3 of them, plus its own native engine. And so that's the System 8's probably where I'd go if I wanted those flavors first. The Jupiter X, on the other hand, there's some overlap. The Jupiter X will do a Jupiter 8, so I've got so many numbers in my head. Juno 106, JX8P, which nothing else really does in Roland's line. The SH101, which is probably my favorite engine in that thing so far. It's just ridiculous. It also has some of the RD piano models in it. It's got all the big vintage drum machines in it. The CR78, Phil Collins in the Air Tonight, TR-808, the 909, 626. It's like an 80s repository of all these killer Roland pieces. So there's some overlap, but the other thing with the the Jupiter X is it's beautiful to behold. It looks like a modern Jupiter 8. It's gorgeous. It's built like a tank. It's got XLR outputs. A lot of guys kind of complained about the build feel of the System 8. For a couple years there, Roland started making things out of plastic. Now it was still really high quality. I love mine, but the Jupiter X kind of gives me that. Okay, this is a classic Roland piece of hardware. It's got aluminum sides. It sounds great, and so hopefully that answers that. Let's see what else. Jason Shepfer, Omnisphere's forefather. Which one? I don't know which one you're talking about. Hello to my Canadian brother. Love you, dude. Hope you're staying well up there. Dave, did I miss what DAW you're projecting? Yes, Logic. I've used Logic for 27 years now, I think. When it first got ported over to the Mac from the Atari platform in 1992, I believe. I was working at a music store at the time. This is just before I moved to Nashville. And I got the product brochure it was called Notator at the time. And it had transitioned into becoming Logic. And when I saw, it was the first DAW that lets you customize your own key commands and have screen sets and modify the way that it looks and operates. Nothing else did that at the time. And so that's kind of what got me on Logic in the first place. And so it's, so much of it is subjective, personal preference and all that kind of thing. They all will get you from point A to point B, but they certainly have strengths. To me, nothing touches Logic in terms of its CPU efficiency. If you're doing a lot of virtual instruments, which I do, especially working in film projects and stuff, Logic is pretty unbeatable as far as that goes. And it really just, it fits me. So a lot of my friends, a couple of my friends are digital performer guys. That's a great one. Especially DP has a lot of great film scoring features. Cubase is also top. Of course, a lot of guys use Pro Tools. Pro Tools MIDI apparently has caught up a bit to Logic, but yeah, it's just personal preference. But to me, there's nothing better than Logic. So anyway, I hope I didn't just contradict myself. Sean McDowell, keyboards over children. I hear you. Yeah, let's leave that one alone. Especially when you have teenagers. What am I missing here? Next solo album, time for a more progressive solo instrumental. Yeah, Michael. That gets into another topic for another time. Music projects. That's going to be a whole topic one night soon. And but I will tell you, I'll just go ahead and answer it. I've got 3 or 4 different project directions that I want to go, and the one that keeps winning out to me is I keep looking around, and I'm like, I'm surrounded by my dream studio that I've wanted since I was 15. I've got all these synthesizers, and that's kind of a current sound right now. So I am definitely going to work my tail off to create a really epic, cinematic, textural synth pop instrumental record, if that makes sense. So that's kind of on my radar. What else? I don't want to. Current favorites, yeah. Seamus Wagner. Again, I hope I'm saying your names right. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Hi, Jim. In your recent duo show with Michael W., you used the Roland Phantom. Were you using internal sounds or using the Phantom as a controller? Well, the Phantom is brand new to me. Roland supplied us with the Phantom and the Jupiter X just before the tour started on March 12th. Excuse me. I got them a day before the tour started and just got one show under our belt with them. And so I didn't have time to really explore them yet. So I'm still using Backstage Pass, which is my custom sound environment that I created for Main Stage. And so technically I'm right now I'm just using it as a controller. But the Phantom has some awesome sounds in it as well, especially pads and I've not been a workstation keyboard guy ever, really. I've always done everything in Logic, so I don't need that. But the Phantom, purely for sounds, it would be a top contender. To me, the Yamaha Montage and the new Roland Phantom are the top 2 if you want, kind of a workstation, everything in the kitchen sink in one keyboard. Phantom is ridiculous. All right, here, a couple more. Christian Jack, how are you? I answered one of your questions, I think. Building a new keyboard rig. Oh, where'd it go? Want to get the Phantom, but is it worth it over just a software rig? I think that depends on, that's kind of a question only you can answer in that if you're going to be using software, it's tough to beat what you can do just with Main Stage and a controller. I've used my Backstage Pass program, whatever you want to call it, exclusively for several years, and I get all my sounds from it. Some guys are worried about reliability. I personally think if you set your rig up properly, you're not going to have any problems. I've done shows with Smitty in front of thousands of people, and I depend on my Mac, and it's bulletproof. It's just a matter of setting it up right. However, that said, it is definitely a cool thing to have a keyboard like the Phantom that you can have a little bit of both. The other thing I love about the Phantom is it integrates with Main Stage. That's one reason I really pursued using that keyboard. It ties in with Main Stage really, really well. So it lets you use the best of both. So I hope that helps. Somebody asked between where did it go? I'm losing these questions. Between the Montage and the Phantom, I think somebody asked, which keybed is better? It's funny you ask. they're neck and neck. They're both excellent. Thing I like about the new crop of key beds that Yamaha and Roland are making is they're very quiet. I don't know if you can. Well, it's mapped to sounds right now, but the old DX7 was one of the best synth actions ever made, but it's really, really loud and clacky when you play it. The Phantom and the Montage are quiet, but they feel great. The Phantom is a little bit lighter. The Montage has a little bit more springiness to it, but they're both premium, great feeling key beds. So you really have to go play them for yourself. A couple more. Tom Sanderson, philosophy theology question. How do you Oh, come on, these questions are going away. How do you personally deal with the tension between performance and worship, both with Smitty and maybe the current worship industry, without identifying anyone in particular? I love questions like this. Let's do a whole night talking about this kind of stuff. I could really talk about this for a while, and I won't. I'll just say briefly, especially when you do it for a living, when we played the show with Smitty hundreds of times, and it can be a challenge to not just check out. You obviously want to be legitimate and honest in that you're hopefully leading people somewhere, and you're worshiping on your own. And people should hopefully see that. You don't ever want to put on an act or put on a show. But that's tricky too, because you want to have good stage presence. You want the presentation to look great. So somewhere in there's a balance of being conscious of that stuff. But also, my parents used to always say, "Yeah, your eyes are closed all the time." Yeah, because if I let my eyes open and I'm looking around, I'm thinking about all kinds of stuff, and then all of a sudden we get to the end of a song, I'm like, oh, what did I just play? So there's definitely a bit of a tension there. That's something you have to be conscious of, and to make it new and fresh every time. Jonathan Willis, performer since 1989. Yeah, buddy. While on the road, this was Wade Steele asked this, and this, I think you asked this last time, and I wanted to answer it. When on the road touring, are you using sampled versions of your studio keyboards? Yes, because, well, with few exceptions. When we get back out, start touring again, I'm going to be taking the Phantom and the Jupiter X. That's going to be my keyboard rig. The majority of the sounds you're going to hear are still going to be Backstage Pass, with exception of some things from the Jupiter X for sure. Some analog stuff and some pads that I'm going to create. But obviously it's not practical to take all this stuff on the road. So that reminds me of one other thing I want to play for you. So I've sampled quite a few things. In fact, all the content in Backstage Pass was created from everything in this room, as well as things that go back years. Some stuff that I sampled from Michael's old Yamaha DX1. There was only 140 of those ever made, and sadly it was lost in the Nashville flood. So I've gone back and I've collected some really old keyboards, and I'm in the process of sampling those. For example, I touched on this last week, but the Yamaha TX816, which is let me see if I can get back to Logic here. Yeah, there's a little picture of it you can see. This is 8 DX7s in a rack case, and when you pan them all apart and detune them all from each other and call up some slightly different sounds, this is a sound that you'll all remember from the 80s. Anyway, yeah, so you all know that sound. That's one that I meticulously sampled from the TX816. That's going to be in the new expansion pack coming up for Backstage Pass, which is all kinds of big layered sounds that I've created with all Yamaha DX stuff. So, yeah, that's the long answer to that question. Yes, I take all my stuff on the road in virtual form. And sampling that stuff is quite a job to get it to respond exactly the same way as the real hardware does. Takes a lot of resources, and but it's a fun challenge. Okay, just one or two more. Christian Jack again. As a Nashville keyboardist, how did you know when to move to Nashville? What are some tips you would give someone wanting to do this? Great question, and one that I've been asked many times. Let's see, what time is it too? All right, we got to wrap this up. Honestly, Christian, I knew early in, well, late 80s. I just had done my research. I was reading CCM magazine all the time, enough to know that, okay, well, Nashville is where I'm going to have to go if I want to do this for a living. And the trigger for me, or the catalyst, was going to see Amy Grant, the Lead Me On tour. Michael was opening. This was 1988. I was 15 years old. I saw that show and I walked out, and that's it. That's what I'm going to do with my life. And I want to work with those people. And of course, at 15, my family all kind of laughed, and they said, you better have a backup plan because, your chances are probably better of getting struck by lightning. So the intervening years, I just, punched my card, went to school, and I went to about a week of community college and got out of there because I knew they're not teaching me anything I don't know already. And so I just got to the point where I'm like, it's time. And so I bought a plane ticket. I was 22 years old, couldn't even rent a car for whatever reason. I think you had to be 25 at the time, but somehow they were able to rent me a car, came down to Nashville, found an apartment and a job. But the crazy thing is, 10 minutes after I bought the plane ticket, this was a leap of faith. It's like the scene in Indiana Jones 3 when Indy's at the chasm and he puts his foot out and the camera pans and his foot lands on solid ground, and it was there all along. That's my story. I just feel like God put it on my heart, and when he does that, he makes a way. I don't like to over-spiritualize things, but I really think it was one of those things I just knew I had to go. So I bought the plane ticket. 10 minutes later, got back to my parents' house, and the phone rang, and it was a good friend of mine, Denny Keatsman, who was the tour manager at the time for DC Talk. And he said, Jim, I know you want to move to Nashville, and I know you really want to play, but I've got a job for you. It might get you here. It's driving a truck around the country and setting up band gear all summer. Would you be interested? And I said, I just bought a plane ticket 10 minutes ago. There's a lot more to it than that. I'll tell the rest of the story sometime. But that was May of 1995. Moved here. Denny was the only person I knew. Worked that summer for DC Talk. And that whole time I was sending resumes to Michael's office. And November of that year, 6 months later, I got the call from Smitty to come out and run his tour doing the technical stuff. And then a year after that, he let me graduate to a band position, and that was 24 years ago. Let's see, what else? Randy, how do I get Backstage Pass? Not the software. Buddy, next time we get out your way, we're going to go to In-N-Out Burger, and I'm taking you backstage. Clark, hey, buddy, good to see you. That sound is owned by David Foster, Sean McDowell. Yes, it is. Okay, let's just... Anything else? Ron Cook, I went to that show, too, in Chicago, Lead Me On tour. Yeah, I'm still after Amy and Michael's management to try and dig up the tapes. It was recorded, but I've heard different stories, and anyway, yeah, that show was absolutely unbelievable. Okay, all right. I've already gone 20 minutes past what I said I was going to. So let's wrap this up. Thank you guys for hanging out with me tonight. Hope this is getting better. I feel like I've made some progress since last week, and it's just going to keep getting better as I learn this technology. It's a lot of moving parts here. So I want to say thank you to Roland for supplying keyboards and the streaming gear that I'm doing this with. Their VR1 HD, which you can't see at the moment, that's helping me do a lot of the video stuff. So Roland, you guys are awesome. Thank you for supporting me. And if you're watching on YouTube, please click on the subscribe button. That would be awesome. I'm not a fan of spam, so I'm not going to spam you or anything like that, but I'd love to keep in touch. If you're on my Facebook page right now, be sure to, whatever it is, like, follow, whatever that stuff is. And I think that's it for now. I'm not sure what the next topic is going to be. I'm probably going to do these at least once a week, so I'll keep you posted. But yeah, I think that's about it. So you guys take care, stay safe, and yeah, thanks for joining me. And if you got any other questions, shoot them my way, and I'll add them to the list for the next time. So okay, we'll see you later.